yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed that. And I will get on to our first speaker from our speaker series today, and that is Manny Campione. He is a principal and market leader at NB. He said he'll pronounce it because I'm really bad at pronouncing names. So, but Manny today will be talking about compensation analytics using salary increase survey results to make the most appropriate decisions during an economic downturn. So I'm going to turn it over to Manny right now, and he'll get us started.
All right, how's that?
Looks good.
All right, everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. So thanks for the introduction, Julia, and pleased to e-meet you. And again, I encourage questions and like questions. So when Julia and I were chatting about this, we had talked about, compensation being a heavy numerical type of discipline within HR, and we talked about various aspects of compensation, and considering the time of the year, considering some of the information that's readily available, I chose now to go a very narrow path and speak to something that is probably in our sights right now, which is around making decisions around salary increases, which is yes, we should, no, we shouldn't, or not sure yet. And we'll look at some of the quantum related to that. And we'll also get into some conversations around how to mine for the best information. So I'll just take you down that journey. Before we do that, I just want to have a quick conversation with you about maturity around analytics specifically. And I've got a variety of points of view that you'll hear throughout the presentation. But if you think of a traditional maturity curve, as it relates to analytics, there's this concept around ad hoc reporting, and I think HR is certainly in that category. I think we've got standalone analytics, we have cause and effect analytics, we have business integrated analytics and predictive analytics. The little red "you are here" dot is my assumption on where most organizations are. I think we're somewhere between ad hoc analytics, standalone analytics, and cause and effect analytics. Regardless of where you are in this continuum, I want to reflect back on what Julia just said, which is around using data and analytics to make business decisions. I will opine throughout around how often we get asked to report or produce reports, and sometimes they just end up as reports and there isn't a decision made, or there are decisions made, but the depth of the analytics isn't necessarily as powerful as it could be. So I'm just going to take you through some specifics today around how NB has just been able to do that from a salary increase survey perspective. I have a variety of concepts to share. One I would like to share is the TBD model, which is about thinking, building, and doing, and it's a conceptual way of looking at information. On the think side is decide what's important. Always consider the context, and when you're dealing with data, how true or how real is it? Some of us have heard of the 3 V's, the 4 V's, and the 5 V's of big data. The one I'd like to hone in on is veracity. How do you know it's real? How do you know it's true? Second step being the build, which is the collection of the data, analyzing the data, and interpreting the data. And the third step is around using the data to prioritize work, tell a bit of a story, and track progress as you go through the cycles of the data look. I'm going to start with just some concepts, again, that have been shared by an economist that we work with at BlackRock, and he's indicated to us that these are the various themes that we should be paying attention to during COVID. And I just came off that little breakout room, had a great chat with Sylvia about how things are different. And one of the things that certainly has affected all of us in some way, shape, or form, notwithstanding physical health and physiological health, is what's happening financially to us by way of our organizations or even our personal spend. And when you I'm not sure if you can see my my cursor, but if you look at this, the second column, there's this concept around investment and how are organizations going to be investing in their business, their workforce, their employees, and so on and so forth. I'm specifically going to focus in on base salaries and the base salary increases. So first, the concept around storytelling. So this is a quick screen grab of our salary increase survey results. So Julia is going to be sending this presentation out to all participants, and I'm not going to click on this link, which will actually take us to the reporting page for this particular survey, but you'll see from a presentation perspective, and this is part of the TBD model, begin with the end in mind. What do you want the information to say? How do you want it illustrated, and how do you want people to navigate through the reports? And if you think of any data set, if you think like the decision maker, if you think about what the end product will look like, it will provide you a very interesting way of looking at the data set. And I'm going to state that from time to time we find ourselves in the boiling a frog mentality, where we just do stuff over and over and over again, whether we know it's of value or not. But conceptually, if we begin with the end in mind, it's fairly easy to be a lateral thinker all throughout. So we focused on a variety of different questions. We focused on a variety of different ways of displaying the data. We certainly focused on a variety of ways of creating some key highlights for the data. Now I'm going to get into our website, which is just screen grabs here. And we do this through Power BI. So when you click on the link from the previous page, it'll take you to the salary forecast page across Canada. What I do want to do is kind of take you through some of the images that I've produced here for you, and talk about how data can either be very misleading or quite informative depending on how you look at it. So when we look at the 2021 salary forecast numbers, it says 2.8%. And some of you might be looking at this and going, considering we're in a recession, a global pandemic and a recession, that feels awfully high. And from an HR discipline perspective, it's important for us to kind of peel back the onion. And when you look at 2.8, I would never pause on it. And what ends up happening is organizations will produce press releases, and they'll say that the average increase across Canada looks like 2.7, 2.8, and so on and so forth. Everyone gets excited about it. The unions say, well, our cost of living increase should be a little bit higher. You've got employees right across Canada saying, yeah, 2.8, that sounds great. Quite a surprise, so let's rock, and we've got things to do. But when we start to look at the details a bit more in this particular diagnostic, and again, this is done through Power BI. If we look at the detail around Canada, you can start to see the regional breakdown. So if you're in Quebec, you'll see that there was a higher percentage of the participants from Quebec. If you're in Ontario, it's kind of the next biggest number of samples, and so on and so forth. So NB is a Montreal-based firm, and we opened operations up in Ontario roughly 2.5 years ago. So not surprising that the majority of our participants are from Quebec, and again, not surprising that the next highest number of participants are from Ontario. So as you start to break down the specifics around the Canada 2.8 into regions, again, being in Power BI, you can start to select the various pieces that are most important to you. What we also did, knowing the economic conditions of this particular time in our lives, if you will, is for the 2020, we created a drop down for impact. So if you can read it in fine print, I apologize for the font size. It has a negative impact, little or no impact, positive impact on revenue. I'll talk about that one in a second, or not available. So there's a lot of organizations that find themselves a negative impact on revenue, and you can think about organizations that are in the entertainment category or the food category. Little or no impact in revenue. There's a cross section of business there. Just think about manufacturing and distribution. And then positive impact on revenue. There's probably a handful of industries that have actually managed to take advantage of this situation. And it's It's SaaS-based education, logistics, technologies, and a series of other sectors. So now we're getting into some greater detail. When we look at the highlights of the 2020 survey, and again, it's important to know that as a compensation professional, there's typically two data sets that are produced. One is specifically a look back at the year that was, and it's around the actuals. So in 2020, how did companies spend their original base salary budgets? And again, you'll start to see that there's some trends here. And what's most important is paying attention to freezes, right? So although there was a number that was 2.8, when you start to look at the freezes, what's included, what's excluded, and what's granted, you'll start to see that there's a new variable piece here. And specifically, if you look at the far right in Ontario, sorry, I'm using my notes because my screen is covering parts of the document, you'll see that the actual granting of base salary increases in Ontario specifically was 1.9%. So that's a bit of a look back. What's important to understand, and this goes back down to understanding where the numbers came from. If you look down at the second bullet on the left, 40% of the organizations had already administered their annual increase cycle. So the survey was conducted in June, July. We were already 3 to 4 months into the into COVID, and depending on the nature of your business, depending on the sector, depending on your annual fiscal cycle, there's a good chunk of organizations that will actually spend their merit budgets in the first quarter of the year. So when you look at the rear view mirror, there's no surprise that there were organizations that had already spent their money. However, 25% of the population did freeze their wages. So again, the concept here is look into the details, try and understand the sample, and see how you compare in that world. The 2021 forecast is of material interest to all of us. And again, this is our typical budget planning season. And if your finance folks haven't asked for it yet, this is the time when they start looking at you to say, okay, HR folks and comp folks, how much money should we be looking at spending in 2021? And again, it's the same concept here. When you look at the data set, you've got the granted and you've got the projected. Some of you might be surprised at the right-hand side of the columns, specifically around the forecast. And again, this goes back down to sample, right? If you look at the number of organizations that participated in the survey, if you think of the types of industries that those organizations that participated in the survey, it's important to kind of pull back and understand how this information is coming available. And then if you go to the next page, this is something that I would say before we get into the nitty-gritty around the forecast, there's a parallel track of analytics that should be done. So this is another Power BI dashboard that we use. And I'll start on the left-hand side and I'll work my way up. On the top left, this is a typical salary structure. The dots represent individual employees, pink or female, blue or male. And then we can translate that into a series of different elements. And we added a series of features here, including performance levels, whether the employees were key employees or critical roles, what levels, and so on and so forth. So the parallel here was, okay, so if we had money to spend, where would we want to spend it? And this is also another conversation around segmentation. So you've got the information that comes from a salary increase budget, but then you also have to take a look at your internal population. And odds are good you'll want to take care of the folks that are below the minimum of the bands or low in the band, assuming you have money. And then you certainly want to make sure that if you have any pay equity type issues, you're solving for them here. So when we look at 2021, as the participants were completing the survey, so we had looked at the implication related to how 2020 was for you as a business. It's the same drop-down categories for what do you believe the impact will be on 2021. So it's the same thing. It's negative, it's little, it's positive or not available at this time. So again, from a data set perspective, we're drilling, we're looking for detailed information. And let me pause here, and this is no slight to other total rewards consulting firms or other organizations that conduct salary increase surveys. Quite commonly, again, back to the press release, you'll see a number that says, hey, it's 2.7% across all industries across Canada. Everyone will get excited and say, yeah, that's the number we're going to. But if you want to make the right decisions for your organization at this time, the more detailed the information, the better capture of relativity based on your business model, the better the decisions you'll be able to make for your organization. This is when we go into combining the two sets of parallel data. So we've got the salary increase forecast information. We have a view to the increases that has been provided for your specific sector or your capture. This is where, as compensation professionals, we start to run some scenarios. And you may run all three of these, or you may run two of them, or you might want to run one. It's common for organizations to run a salary freeze scenario at this time, but then what happens with these outliers? You may want to reduce the budget overall, and you may want to say, well, I want to dedicate it to a specific segment in the organization, and that's where these departments will help you figure out where you want to spend your merit pool, if any. And then you may have something that's even more specific that is targeted to a specific employee population. And this could be things like key jobs or critical talent. So again, the concept here is take a number and drill down and then run the analysis against your employee base or your employee population. If we were live, I'd say show of hands of, which organizations that you work with go super deep into the salary increase budget. But what's happening is there's a ton of scrutiny happening at the CFO and CHRO level right now about funds and making sure that you make the best decisions on where you're spending your fixed costs at an organizational level is absolutely critical at this time. I'll go back to the maturity model for a second, and then I've just got a couple slides to end. But we talked about the maturity curve, working our way from ad hoc up to predictive analytics. At the beginning of the recession, or the pandemic, if you will, NB decided to run some predictive analytics in parallel. And what we did is we took a look at some of the information that was accessible to us back in 08, 09. I'd like to think there's a few folks on this call that were in compensation at that time. I myself was, and it was a pretty tough economy, obviously, and we had some challenges by way of budgeting and so on and so forth. But you know what, we like to experiment. That's one of the NB trademarks. We like to innovate, we like to experiment. So we said, let's take a look at some key economic indicators from 09, 08, and let's take a look at some of the same indicators, and we'll fast forward into 2020. And we took a look at what was actual in 09, and then we ran a very strong predictive analytics model with 3 scenarios: pessimistic, realistic, and optimistic. And it was amazing what we actually ran through the system to say, we believe that the realistic is going to be 2 to 2.2, and then we had the lower end and the upper thresholds. So there are ways to experiment with your data set. The key is having a variety of different things. In our cases, we had some good key economic indicators between the periods of 08, 09 to now, and even further back. So we ran an algorithm to say, what could it look like? What should it look like? And the reason we ran this, one is to kind of play around with it. Others is we had some companies that were saying, you know what, we are a cash flow business, and we need to know roughly where we should be spending our money. And in some cases, it was specific to 2020 and what they needed to do for the remainder of the year. Other companies were already into 2021 forecasting and planning and said, can you give us a best guess without throwing a dart at a dartboard? So we said, let's have some fun with this, and let's see where it ended up. And we actually came out pretty close. I think our predictive analytics were more pessimistic than our actual results right now. I'll just go into final thoughts around what I've presented, and I may have gone a little bit fast, so obviously hoping for questions along the way. But you know, when we go to the first page of the presentation, and we had that little dashboard and that little document presentation, you know, there's a variety of messages here that I think are important. Focus on the quality of the output. Always make sure, if you begin with the end in mind specifically, be empathetic to your reader. I've seen reports that are 30, 40 pages, and they take, you know, 40 hours of work for one person or small teams, and they end up getting what I would call blue boxed or shredded, which is you spend a ton of time producing various reports. There's debates on some of the calculations, including turnover. That's a bunny trail I can go down if anyone wants to. But I'd say the tighter the presentation, the tighter the information set, the look and feel will help you have the business take the summary and report seriously. Focus recommendations, very similar to the above theme. I'd say come out of a large data set with one or two recommendations. Break it down, explain the logic, and explain the rationale. Explain the risks, explain the benefits. It's certainly important to not say 2.8. I'd come out of this and say, you know, here's a one-pager on why it's 2.8, but here's how I want to break it down. Or here's how we should spend it, and you pull up those really cool Power BI tables, and you go, and here's how it's gonna adjust the salaries for certain folks. You know, I'm going to argue that a lot of the HRIS models and tools out there are overly sophisticated and also overly complicated. If you can do it in Excel, more power to you. If you can do it in a BI platform, more power to you. For me, it's about simple, right? If you can, you know, take a run at the numbers and make it really, really simple to use in the end, that's all that matters. It's about making sure it gets used and decisions are made. There's you know, there's a common debate here, and I was reading an article that McKinsey posted last week on data. It's called "How to Be Great at People Analytics." I'm not sure if you saw it. It was published on Friday, and it's actually quite a fascinating article. And it says the same things I've been talking about now for over 2 years, which is HR does not have any source of truth when it comes to data sets. You know, we may have a fantastic machine or a fantastic HRIS, but it doesn't allow us to capture all the information we want. So we may have an HRIS that says, you know, here's payroll, here's pay, here's job codes, here's geos, here's position types, and so on and so forth, but it doesn't allow us to string together all the disparate information out there, including engagement data, turnover data, candidate rejections and acceptances. There's a lot of valuable information that is disparate, and unless you're able to integrate all the data sets together, HR will continue to produce small-ish recommendations and reports, and I think there's so much to be looked at and processed if we can combine a bunch of information together. And where you can integrate data points, the better. I've seen and done some pretty cool things where I look at exit and turnover information. I look at engagement scores. I look at you know, quality of manager scores, and you're able to create a heat map and go, if we don't fix this problem in Southwestern Ontario, we're going to have issues with talent. So there's a variety of ways of looking at the data. It's just it's not as easily strung together. It's more of an elbow grease conversation. You know, same old, same old. You know, if you begin with the end in mind, and if you think of the TBD model, if you think about analytics being conducted for purposes of decision making, then it becomes a lot easier to manage going forward. And I want to leave you with with one final thought and a question, which is, when you're looking at broad statements like salary increase survey numbers, and you'll see a lot of media over the next little bit come out, dig, right? Try and understand the sample, try and understand the implications, try and understand, how many organizations did or didn't participate that are in your specific industry. Don't gobble up a 2.8 or 2.9% or 1.9%. And yeah, that's what we've got to do. Dig deeply and make sure you have the right information available to you, so you can provide your executives or CFO and other some detail. And my ask of you is this, from a question perspective, is if there's a takeaway in this particular presentation, and there's one thing that you'd want to take back to your peer set, what would it be? And that's a requirement for reflection. But I certainly want to think that this kind of dialogue, this kind of forum, allows us to share with one another and go back to our colleagues and say, what, maybe there's a few things we should be doing a little bit differently, and here's a recommendation. That's me. I aged very quickly throughout the presentation. I had my glam shot on page 1, and then I have what I really look like at the very end. My contact info is here, both cell number, email, and LinkedIn. And at the bottom, if you're looking for access to some of the cool reports or bulletins that we've produced over the year, please take a look at the Normandin Beaudry website. I say this on a regular basis: we're Canada's best kept secret in total rewards. There's 300 of us, and we are experts in a lot that we do. And you can see we love analytics. And we're an organization that's founded on actuarial science. So no surprise we like our numbers, and no surprise we like our tools. Thank you for your time, and I'm free for any questions, unless, Julia, you want to host and hold them later.